Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our guest this week is an assistant news editor at the Libertarian Institute, as well as a regular contributor at antiwar.com. You can also find his work at Consortium News, Zero Hedge, and RT. Will Porter, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me back on. I appreciate it, man. I feel underdressed. You are very sharp in your outfit today. Sure.
I've given up on complaining to people that, if you were going to go on Letterman, is that how you would dress, Will?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's fair enough.
I got to represent the home team, right? If I'm going on Letterman.
Yeah, that's right. Well, speaking of the home team, so in that little intro I just gave you, I know that over the last year or so, you were a regular contributor for RT. That's Russia Today, right? Or Russia Tonight, or Russia Thursday, or I forget what the T is for. But I wanted to ask you about that because I know that for some people they might say, oh, that's cool, it's another writing credit. But for other people, they hear that R word in there, and I'm not talking about retard. I'm talking about Russia, and they think, oh, wait a minute, Comrade Porter, what have you been up to? So tell us about what it was like writing for RT.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't mind talking about that at all. I wish I had some kind of like deep, dark secrets to reveal to you guys, but honestly, my 5 years at RT as a staff writer and editor were pretty much what you'd expect from, most other online news outlets. Right off the bat, I will say, they are far from a perfect publication. They are partially funded by the Russian government. They have a lot of, some blind spots in terms of the things they will cover. That's probably true about most media outlets out there. But, so I have some complaints about them. But in terms of the usual criticisms that they usually get, I think they are often unfairly maligned. Like, typically you'll hear the line is that RT is a state-controlled media outlet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But having worked there for 5 years, I can say that is just not true. I mean, they're state-funded, like the BBC is, but there was not a single time in my 5 years where I felt like my work was controlled by anyone in the Kremlin or something. I wrote over 4,000 stories at RT. I edited probably a similar number. And so I'm about as intimately familiar with their writing and editing and publishing process as anyone on the planet. And in all that time, I can say I was not, I was given a pretty free hand to describe and characterize events, as I saw fit. I would not, I wouldn't have worked there otherwise if I felt like, people were, influencing my writing like that. In fact, and actually this is one thing that I'm not sure the management there would want me to say, but for over a year, actually, I actually ran the entire night shift there on the website by myself, like just me, like no other editors or management or writers. I had full authority to choose what to write and how to write it, and I published it on my own. So for a Russian propaganda machine that is supposedly forcing its writers to say they love Vladimir Putin or whatever, it does seem a little strange that they would have some punk ass like me, so I'm an American no less, running their whole operation. So I have complaints and criticisms about how things went there, but most of it was not in terms of like they made me say I love Russia or something. I worked with a lot of very talented journalists and editors and stuff there, and so I don't know. I don't really have many regrets. And for the people who would, write me off as being some kind of Kremlin apologist, like, I kind of don't care what those people have to say. They never read a damn word of what I wrote there anyway.
Sure.
So I think, people who actually do read my stuff, I would hope at least would see that I'm pretty even-handed and fair in how I write, so.
Well, you get around, a lot of the different news organizations out there because you're the kind of guy that's like, well, I'm looking at a wide breadth of information because I need ideas and stories and that sort of thing too. But right. It reminds me of there was that phrase for people who are old enough to remember the platform formerly known as Twitter. Of course, X with Elon Musk obviously has been run a little bit differently. But you remember there was that time on Twitter where they would have the little tag and it would say state-sponsored media. But of course, Al Jazeera would be like state-sponsored media, right? And then RT would be state-sponsored media. And that's assuming they didn't just delete their channel altogether. But, funny how that works. I never saw state-sponsored media on NPR, CNN, whatever. Funny how that works. And so not the hypocrisy aside, I feel like, and I already know what your answer is going to be, but if you could choose right now, and you're gonna work the same hours and you're gonna make the same salary, but you're having to choose which of these two platforms you're gonna write for their website. Which one would you choose? Would you throw your hat back in the ring with RT and hope that you would get a fair shake with your editorials, or would you write for CNN?
You said
same money, same everything, but you get to pick which one.
Oh, and then RT for sure. I think I would have way more freedom to write about the kind of issues I want to write about. Like CNN, I think it would have way more editorial control. I think CNN too, like bigger mainstream outlets, like they send out like memos and directives to their like this is the way we want to cover things, and like that was never something at RT. Like it was very down to the individual writer how you're going to characterize the news. So yeah, I think I'd stick with the Kremlin there.
Stick with the Kremlin there. Well, like I had mentioned Al Jazeera for instance, but like of course, like what you have the BBC too, right? I mean, that's technically that's state sponsored media, but again, you would never see that tag on them the way you would see it on others. I think it's there's a certain interesting, just purely from the journalism side of it, is and I appreciate that you have this take that. Do they have blind spots? Are they trying to, turn down the frequency on certain things, turn up the frequency on certain things? Of course they are. Yeah, it's sometimes when I see people say, "Oh, I don't like so and so, they have an agenda," and I'm like, "Well, of course they do. You don't? It's weird that you wouldn't have an agenda, right?"
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to see why Russia would want to fund an outlet that frequently criticizes U.S. foreign policy or supports Chelsea Manning or Julian Assange or something. Like it's really not that hard to understand why they would, want that out there in the world. So,
yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that the reason why certain elements, particularly in the West, would demonize platforms like that is precisely so that if say you were to write an article for RT and it was very pro Julian Assange, then that way they can say, oh, look, you see, they're the bad guys and they like Julian Assange. And so obviously, the enemy type situation, right? Like, well, if Julian Assange were truly a hero, he wouldn't be heralded by literally Hitler, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely an RT. I think that was sort of a trade-off too, is like, an outlet that, like, look, if you want to read the most harsh criticisms of Vladimir Putin or something, like that is probably not something they're going to publish much at RT. However, if you want to read about Assange or Edward Snowden or something, they have a huge comparative advantage. And so I think I'll take that trade-off. I don't know. My usual beat, my usual subjects that I cover were things that they were very good on. So in that case, our agenda is aligned, I guess,
Well, on that note, Will, we had Dave DeCamp on the show last week. It was his first time being on the show, and I really appreciate him being here. And when we talked, because it was about a week ago today, the bombing of the Iran consulate in Damascus had just happened. That was breaking news. Of course, obviously, it was Israel that had committed it. And we talked a little bit about, I wonder what's going to happen next. I wonder who's going to claim responsibility. I wonder if there's going to be a blowback. But that got me to thinking, I think an interesting exercise for you and me, because God knows I really don't want to just sit here and rehash Israel and Palestine yet another night. But one thing I did want to do is sometimes I'm scrolling through social media or the news and I'm looking at the comments sections, which, by the way, don't ever do that. Ladies and gentlemen, don't ever do that. One of the first things I ever was taught by an editor when I wrote articles was don't ever look at the comments. Ever. And actually, I'll tell you who that was. John Miltmore at Fee said, "Don't look at the comments section." And he said the reason is that you don't have to respond because your comment is the article. That was your comment. You don't have any more comments to make, so just don't even look at it. Yeah. But I can't help but kind of keep my finger on the pulse, so to speak. And I know that there's a lot of just the average layman out there who he sees headlines, right? But he's got to go to work. He's got to feed his family. He's got stuff to do. So he doesn't read these. He doesn't read everything that's out there. He just sees the headlines and he's just trying to keep up with, well, who did what? Did they really do this? This side says they're the monsters. That side says they're the monsters. And so what I thought I would do is I would ask you a handful of questions purely from the layman's perspective. And you would tell me, is this just propaganda from the opposite side, or is there actually some truth to this accusation?
All right, sure.
All right. So God help you, Will, but here we go.
All right.
The first one is you'll hear a lot of people, particularly on the pro-Palestinian side of things, that will say, well, it's hard to have a conversation about hostages when the IDF, they kill hostages. And I'm not just talking about killing Palestinian hostages / prisoners, and we can get into that later, the difference between a hostage and a prisoner. I'm not talking about them just killing Palestinians. I'm talking about they will also kill Israeli hostages rather than freeing them Is that true? Is that on purpose, or is there nothing to that at all?
All right, so the first two, is it true and is it on purpose? It is true indeed the Israeli Defense Forces have killed some of their own people. Is it on purpose? Is a question I think that's, maybe a little more complicated to answer, So I imagine your audience knows Hamas, the Palestinian militants, they took like 200 people hostage with their big attack last year. About half of them have been released so far. But given the scale of Israel's bombing campaign, like it really kind of makes you wonder like how safe those hostages are in Gaza. I mean, if you see the extent of the destruction, so like asking, is it on purpose? Like, I don't think they're deliberately going out there trying to kill their hostages. It's just maybe a question of like, are they being careful enough? I mean, the families of hostages have raised this concern many, many times. They've said like, are you bombing my loved one? That has not really seemed to have had a lot of impact in the conduct of the war. However, most recently, the Israelis did acknowledge killing a 67-year-old woman hostage. She was shot by an Israeli helicopter, and this is during the October 7th attack. So this happened actually inside of Israel in a kibbutz. The Israelis, of course, concluded that this was an accident, just a result of the confusion that day. And it does seem they were taken off guard by the attack. Like the response was very kind of haphazard. And there have been similar cases in other places too. Like on October 7th, there was a kibbutz called Be'eri, where some of the survivors there have described like the Israelis basically indiscriminately firing into homes. And during an interview actually with one of those survivors, she was straight up asked like, did Israeli forces kill hostages that day? And she said yes, undoubtedly. Like she said there was a time where a tank fired 2 shells into a house and killed everybody inside. The Israeli government has not acknowledged those, but they have acknowledged a couple other cases. There was one last December where they acknowledged killing three hostages in Gaza, again on accident. So I guess to cut to the chase here, yes, the Israeli military has certainly killed hostages throughout this war. Is it on purpose? I don't think so, but I think if you're going to criticize them, you might say they're not being careful enough in their operations, perhaps.
Well, I do definitely want to seize on something that you said there almost at the very beginning. So of the hostages that were taken, you're saying is as many as about half of them have been released. So they weren't all just brutally tortured and killed. A lot of them have been released.
Correct. Yeah, a few months ago there was like a big like prisoner swap deal where the Israelis have a bunch of Palestinians in custody that they've arrested over the years for sometimes real offenses, sometimes not. But so there was a deal. I forget. I think it might have been December, January. There's a hostage swap deal where about half of the people taken on October 7th were released. I think there's about 100 people still left that's believed to be left, assuming they're all still alive.
Well, because on a similar vein, because in just in case, I would find it shocking that there would be any hardcore Zionists watching the show, even at this point. They would have already tuned out. But on the strange case that there is, we are going to look at things from both sides. I promise you, give us a minute. But we've also seen the tape and the videos of Israeli forces, rounding up entire wagon trains and truckfuls of Palestinian males. Sometimes, I mean, of any age. Sometimes they're kids, sometimes they're older men, elderly men, and they're stripping them down to their underwear and loading them up onto vans. Are those prisoners or are those hostages? That sounds very hostagey to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's a weird distinction there. I mean, if they're going to call them combatants, then I guess they'd say they are prisoners of war. But I guess that's often questionable. Like you said, when there's like little kids and stuff among the people being rounded up, it seems relatively indiscriminate. But I guess for Israel, any fighting age male, military age male, 12 and up, is considered a potential combatant.
But in all fairness, so we talked about some of the hostages being released. But there have been actual swaps. So presumably some of those people that we just mentioned, the Palestinians, they hopefully have also been released. Or released back into a war zone, but released nonetheless.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that actually did. I believe that it has occurred. Like the actual swap has happened, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll hit one more before we take our commercial break. Something you hear a lot now, and this was something else that we touched on. It was breaking news right as Dave and I sat down to talk. Was the NGO, the food NGO? What was it? The World
Central Kitchen. Yeah.
World Central Kitchen, And man, I'll be honest with you. Sorry, Zionists, but the evidence doesn't look particularly good on that one. The official narrative, of course, is they did actually own up to it, but they own up to it with this was a tragic accident. But man, the accuracy of those strikes certainly don't look very accidental to me. But I'm not necessarily. I'm actually just using this as a setup for. We have seen accusations and there's been video, but I'll let you kind of settle it for us. There's been accusations that not only does the IDF target/prevent aid and aid workers, but that they have also used aid as bait. That aid goes in, people go to try to retrieve said aid. And when I say people, I don't mean armed Qassam fighters, I mean people. Yeah. And then they end up getting attacked. What truth is there to that statement?
Well, there is definitely footage showing precisely what you just described. I mean, Al Jazeera recently published something, Al Jazeera, the Qatari, propaganda outlet, I guess you got to take their word on the video. It is video footage showing what happened there. And it is, it's a bunch of people grabbing aid from boxes. None of them appear armed or doing anything militant or Hamasi. They're people just, trying to get some food. And at least one guy was killed in this case by Israeli snipers. They seem to be shooting at people just grabbing aid. And so, it does seem like a kind of a perverse bait that they're doing there. I can't say exactly at what frequency that's happening, how often they're posting up by these aid drops, to shoot people. But I mean, there have been many cases of Palestinians waiting for aid, being attacked. Back in February, there was a case, a thing called now the Flower Massacre, where Israeli ground troops actually killed over 100 Palestinians, lining up, waiting for food. Wow. There had been something of a disturbance there. I'm not sure if you call it quite a riot, but there was a disorder in this place where all these Palestinians were waiting for food, and the Israelis fired into the crowd pretty, indiscriminately. They killed over 100 people, and so there are cases of this. There was another case back in February, a UN convoy with very clearly marked insignia on it was a trailer, a semi truck. Has a huge UN insignia on it. And if people saw that World Central Kitchen, where how they had hit it right through the roof, it was pretty much the same thing with the UN insignia. It looks like the Israelis shelled this truck very accurately. It was a very accurate accident that they've had there. So there have been many cases of, aid, not only the aid shipments, but also Palestinians waiting for aid being attacked.
Well, that's the thing. I know that I had made the quip before that, there. I think one of the things that really grinds people that both makes it hard to defend if you're on that side of things, but also makes it red meat if you're pro-Palestine, is that a lot of times you're talking about video that some video gets released by Al Jazeera, and of course everyone who thinks that that's illegitimate will just say, I'll just discard that, doesn't matter. But the rest of us are like, well, man, I don't know, I'm looking at the video, it doesn't exactly look like CGI to me. But I think what really gets people is a lot of times the evidence that comes out is stuff that Israel itself is gleefully acknowledges, saying, hey, look at this thing we did. Look at this operation we pulled off. And it kind of makes you wonder what is going on with the actual political regime in Israel that they would gleefully and intentionally post videos that would make Julian Assange WikiLeaks blush.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a real divide when you hear Israeli officials and politicians speaking in English versus when they're speaking in Hebrew and addressing their own people. I mean, there are times even when they're speaking in English where they say some pretty egregious things. But I mean, if you listen to some of these, there are some blood-curdling statements coming out from Israeli officials and often speaking in Hebrew to Israelis, calling the Palestinians Amalek and all these, biblical references of how we have to wipe them all out. And so it seems to me, sometimes they are just unabashed. I think they feel a certain sense of impunity in what they're doing. I mean, so far they have not faced, they faced some condemnation from other countries, but they haven't faced any kind of substantial sanctions or anything like that. It doesn't seem to me with any countries that they have real trade relations with or whatever. So, I'm not sure what explains their brazenness. It might just be they feel like a lack of impunity, that they can get away with this stuff.
Well, on that note, Will, we're going to take a quick break. But we will be back to talk about one of your recent articles about using AI to determine kill lists. Boy, what a fantastic idea that is. Right after this commercial break. Oh boy. It's Too Late with Alan Mosley is proudly supported by Fox & Sons Coffee. Fans of It's Too Late use code ITL and receive 18% off orders of $25 or more. Shipping's always free on orders over $37.99, so get yours today at their website, which is www.foxandsons.com. It's www.foxandsons.com. Welcome back to the show, everybody. So, Will, you wrote this article that's over on antiwar.com. Israel lets AI decide who dies in Gaza. The IDF is increasingly reliant on artificial intelligence to mark Palestinians for death, innocent or not. Now, I'm going to let you explain, give everybody the Reader's Digest version of that, but I just want to lead off by saying, I've seen what some of this AI can do. Like I see the chat bots that can speak in broken English, and I see the pictures where the people have like 7 fingers on their hands. I'm not sure I trust Skynet to determine the kill list. So what's the story on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess this is kind of a foreseeable trend, given how rapidly AI has been advancing lately. But increasingly, militaries are using artificial intelligence in various ways. And I think Israel is kind of leading the pack with that. They use several different AI systems to plan and organize their operations. But most recently, we have learned about a program that's called Lavender, excuse me, which is covered in a great report. There's an Israeli outlet, actually, believe it or not, called 972 Magazine. And they've been really great on covering the, Israelis sort of like automated, they called it a mass assassination factory, which I think is sort of accurate. So basically, this Lavender program, it crunches together a bunch of raw intelligence they have, and it helps them generate these target lists to find people and places to bomb. And so, for example, like just in the first few weeks of the Gaza war, this Lavender program churned out 37,000 people to kill. It's generating targets at like a far faster rate than human beings ever could. People actually, looking at real evidence and things like that. And apparently, according to this 972 Magazine report, which they are citing IDF sources, anonymous Israeli sources. This is coming from people presumably with familiarity with these programs. The field commanders in Israel, they are very reliant on this. Effectively, they are just taking the word of the machine, like typing it into ChatGPT. Is this guy Hamas? And it says yes, and they just, they go for it. Like they are not consulting other intelligence to confirm whether the machine gets it right. Now, look, I'll admit, I personally don't have the technical knowledge to like explain the nuts and bolts of exactly how the system works, but effectively they are collecting and feeding it a bunch of raw intelligence, and it spits out a bunch of targets. And one of the unique features of this newer program, Lavender, is that they're increasingly focusing on lower-level Hamas operatives and organizing airstrikes on their personal homes, where their families happen to live too. And this has been a consistent trend throughout the war, Israeli bombing private residences. I think something like this data is months old now, but at least 300,000 housing units have been hit in Israeli strikes, which is something like 60% of all of the housing infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. And so these are, they are bombing gigantic numbers of homes and apartment buildings, and a lot of it being directed by these programs. And so with this Lavender system, the homes of these suspected militants are considered first and the best option for a strike. For whatever reason, they're deciding that this is like the best time to hit these guys. And inevitably, that is going to lead to a large number of non-combatant casualties. Typically, the wives and children of fighters aren't considered combatants in traditional, but I guess with total war, everyone's fair game. But no, this Lavender program, that's not the only one that they've been using. There's another one called The Gospel, which 972 Mag is also covered. It does a similar thing. It generates these vast target lists. There's another one called Fire Factory, which when those other programs establish the targets, Fire Factory uses AI to like automatically calculate like the munitions payloads and to assign the targets to particular drones and aircraft. So yeah, they are increasingly automating a lot of their fighting. And with these trends, I think you mentioned Skynet. I don't think it's it's not too far off to imagine some kind of nightmarish scenario where some all-knowing machine marks people for death with no input from human beings, and then they dispatch a drone automatically to go bomb their house. Like, not to be too much of a doomer, but it does seem like that is sort of where things are heading. And Israel is definitely leading the way with this. Other militaries are studying AI, but the Israelis seem to be actually using it for strikes to actually kill people more so than others.
Well, while you were talking, I was sitting here thinking, Guy, I just couldn't imagine generating a list of 37,000 people to kill. But then I had to look it up, and sure enough, 79,000 people work for the IRS. So actually, I think I could generate such a list. So kind of bringing some of this full circle. So we have the invasion of Gaza. It's obviously brutal. A lot of people are dying. A lot of homes are being destroyed. There's a lot of accusations that there's really no effort being made to not kill innocent men, women, and children. I was going to say women and children, but screw men, right? You don't get to be innocent. But no matter how brutal it looks on TV, the line from the U.S./Biden regime is well, we support Israel unconditionally, and then you have. And then you have the bombing of the NGO and the aid workers. And then what do you hear? Well, that sure did make us angry, but we support Israel unconditionally. So I guess my question is can you imagine a line where the U.S. would say, okay, we can't cross that line. If you do that, we're out.
It's honestly hard to say. I mean, with some of those aid workers with World Central Kitchen, there was one U.S. Canadian citizen there. So bombing American citizens apparently is not the red line for them. It's hard to say. I mean, like you're saying, the Biden administration will occasionally get up there and say hey guys, maybe try stop killing so many civilians, but they really don't seem to take much concrete action that would maybe make that happen. So honestly, I don't know what the red line would be. Maybe nuking the Gaza Strip. Openly declaring genocide using that term. I'm not sure what the actual red line would be.
But of course, which is funny because there's all manner of videos out there of talking heads on Israel TV that do openly say those things, but they're not. I guess they would be not official state sponsored, comments. But I know that those feelings are out there. So I want to turn our attention to you had a funny exchange on social media that unfortunately, guys, I can't show you the screenshots. I didn't get them in time. They've been deleted, but I want you to know. Will has been found out. One of his biggest fans has turned on him. He called you a Zionist. Will Porter, ladies and gentlemen, of antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. He's a Zionist. Will, why did this guy call you that?
Well, because the context of this whole exchange, I had cracked a joke. I had said, when they kill innocent people, it's terrorism. When we do it, it's counterterrorism. And I had a response from this guy who is very, very much a pro-Palestine kind of activist type, asking me, what innocent people have the Palestinians ever killed? And I was like, well, I mean, just have a look at any of the copious footage of October 7th to start with. There's plenty of cases of Hamas fighters killing seemingly innocent people. A girl cowering on the ground getting shot in the face by a guy with a rifle seems like a pretty egregious case. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of that's what got me labeled a Zionist. That's my conversion to Zionism, was because I acknowledge that Palestinian armed groups do indeed have excesses and they do kill innocent people.
Well, it's funny that we started tonight's show talking about different media platforms and how, frankly, they're all biased. We're all biased. We all have biases. We all have our own agendas. And frankly, we don't need state-sponsored media to enforce things, because sometimes we do it ourselves, don't we? So this guy, who is presumably very pro-Palestine, and you had made this comment, and I believe you. You're about as sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause as us mere pasty white Westerners can be, and yet that wasn't good enough for him, because you dared to point out even one little factoid it holds them in any type of negative light at all. And I think obviously it's a shame that, and maybe we're all guilty of it in certain ways. Hey, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, so I don't want to see any data or statistics about the 49ers. Fuck the 49ers. Go Cowboys, right? So we're all a little bit biased in our own way, but it's really not helpful, is it?
No. And for what I think a lot of this is, I think there are a lot of these, many of them are on the left, many on the very far left, where they don't want to look at this conflict as something that happens in reality. They want to have comic book heroes and villains. And for them, they want to have a mascot. They want to have someone to feel good about, the Palestinians. So you can't ever acknowledge any wrongdoing. Whereas I think any kind of serious adult studying a 70-year long, this is a decades long conflict we're talking about here. Any serious adult has to acknowledge that yes, there's going to be violence. The Palestinians, I believe, are resisting an unjust authoritarian rule, occupation, and sometimes their groups they resort to acts of terrorism as a form of resistance, and we should not justify the innocents who are killed in that. I think that's I think that's the mature way to look at this. But for many people, I think, who want to support the Palestinians, they think that if we acknowledge any wrongdoing on their behalf, then that justifies what Israel's doing in return. And I think that actually, to be a stronger ally to them, you can say, no, look, we can acknowledge the bad things that Palestinians do and still say they have rights, still say the Israelis don't have the right to occupy them for 70 years or to, genocide them, if that's the term you want to use. So I think that is the more serious and mature and even a stronger position in support of the Palestinians than the more comic book ones that says they can never do wrong.
Well, I know that this reminds me of a comment that our mutual friend Kyle Anzalone made, co-host over at Conflicts of Interest and the Libertarian Institute. He got into a similar exchange with similar type of energy as your exchange, but with someone who was more pro-Israel than they were pro-Palestine, and basically their point of view is that, of course, I'm playing the game of collective guilt, right? So if any Palestinian anywhere in Gaza throws a rock at a tank, that means we have to glass the whole region because they attacked us. That's basically this person's position. Yeah. But to be a little bit more generous to that person's point of view, his position is that, well, there's the right way and the wrong way to protest, right? There's the right way and the wrong way to riot, to fight back, to whatever. And Kyle gave a very poignant question in response. It just simply was, I don't want hypotheticals. I'm asking you, what do you feel is the appropriate way for the Palestinians to defend themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you listen to the words and actions of Israeli politicians, they will say that the Palestinians will never have a state. They will never have independence, and that our occupation is basically indefinite. And so for someone who's told that, what other option, basically they're being asked to either lay down and die, accept this permanent, what I would consider authoritarian rule. If you look at what happens in the West Bank every single day, even before October 7th, this is a nightmarish scenario there of military occupation. So I would ask too, what are people to do? What other option are they left with but to take up arms? And I agree, there are questions of there's a moral questions. Do the Palestinians have the right to resist? Which I would say they do. Then there's also, practical questions how should they resist and what will the outcome actually be? So October 7th, the Palestinian attack there's obviously a lot of moral considerations there too for a lot of the innocent people who were killed. But just practically, I'm not sure that has advanced their cause very well. So even if the Palestinians had limited their attack to military targets that day, there is still the practical question, is this the smart way to do this? Should we do this, even if we have the right to do it? So I think it's very complicated. It's not there's a lot of considerations here in terms of how is a group like the Palestinians to respond and fight back. But no matter what, I don't think that means we have to defend the worst excesses of a group like Hamas, and certainly don't have to defend the Israeli retaliation to those excesses.
Well, we'll wrap up here, but I was reminded, I was having a conversation with my buddy Mike recently, and we were talking about, particularly from the U.S. side of things, is the U.S. involvement, that Israel can play the role of the bully, and they can try to drag Iran into war and do all these things because they're operating on the pretense of, well, we're just going to get all the arms and munitions and money we need from the U.S., and if things get too hot, then there'll be carrier groups in the Gulf, right? They're operating under those assumptions. Unfortunately, we are out of time because I would love to talk again sometime about whether or not that actually would come to pass, or if maybe they've put the cart a little bit before the horse. But I feel like at this point, my opinion of the whole mess, purely from an American perspective, is U.S. foreign policy for 60 years in the Middle East has achieved one thing. It's taken 100 warring tribes that all hate each other and made them all hate the United States.
Yeah, I mean, can't disagree with that. Does seem to be. There's certainly some unity among disparate groups about you got the Yemenis and you got the Houthis in Yemen, you got the Iranians, you got all these people, and that's kind of that is something that certainly unites them.
Well, we don't do anything if not bring people together, Will. So on that note, Will, where can people go to support you and find more of your content?
Yeah, as you said at the beginning, I'm an assistant news editor at the Libertarian Institute. That's like the primary place. That's my base of operations. But you can also find me at antiwar.com. That's also in the news section often there. Those are the two primary places to find me.
All right, Will, it's time for the bonus round. We're going to get you out of here on this one. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So a coffee comes from a coffee plant, and the coffee plant does indeed have fruit. Is coffee a fruit juice?
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Yes. Yes. What's the distinction? What's the difference?
That is correct. Coffee is indeed a fruit juice. Now, I know that there's going to be people out there, Will, who are going to say that, well, the beans are the seeds of the plant, and so you're not squeezing the seeds as opposed to, the actual... Nerd. Yeah, right, exactly. Will already cover it for us, guys. Shut up, nerds. Coffee's a fruit juice. Guys, we're going to be back to wrap up the show right after this commercial break. Don't go away. If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley.